Meeting into session. Thank you for joining us today. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Because of COVID-19, we will be doing this canvas.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay. Because of COVID-19, we will be doing Canvas differently. Thank you for your patience as we transition to doing these meetings by phone and webinar. Also, we will be practicing social distancing today, so you will only see one supervisor today and no presenters. As you can see, Supervisor Gallardo is with me here this morning. Supervisor Sellers, Gates, and Chukri will be calling in this morning to assist us in keeping our distance. Thanks again for doing your part by calling in. Andrea, with the County Attorney's Office, are you on this phone call?
Yes, I am. Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, let's begin the meeting. I will first ask Scott Jarrett if you are on the line today.
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman. Good morning.
Good morning. And is our recorder, Adrian Fontes, and Mr. Ray Valenzuela with you or on the line as well?
I'm on the line separately, Mr. Chairman. Members, good morning.
Good morning. Will Ray Valenzuela?
Ray, Chairman.
Okay. Great. Ray is also on. Okay. Go ahead, Fran.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that Mr. Sellers, Mr. Chukri, and Mr. Gates are already on the phone.
Do you want to do a roll call?
I think we can. Supervisor Chukri?
Here.
Supervisor Gates?
Here.
Supervisor Sellers?
Here.
Supervisor
Gallardo is here, and Chairman Hickman is here. Thank you so much.
Okay, very good. So on the screen right now, we have a presentation for Mr. Scott Jarrett to make. It will be a very brief presentation. So Scott, if you can take us through it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I appreciate you calling this special meeting to consider the approval of the canvas for the March 17th Democratic presidential preference. Before I begin the presentation, I do want to offer an opportunity for Mr. Recorder Fontes and Mr. Ray Valenzuela to introduce themselves and say a few comments.
Please do.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'll start very briefly. I just want to acknowledge the folks real quickly. The 2020 PPE proved to everyone that our innovation, energy, and responsiveness, coupled with years and years of election administration experience, were a recipe for success. Our challenges in the face of national and state emergencies really had to bring us together, although we were already working well together. So first, I want to mention that we had to deal with new equipment in the field and training adjustments. Shout out to Brittany Johnson over at the election department, Hope O'Gain and Christy Passarelli, who redid a lot of that training stuff literally overnight the weekend prior to the election. They did yeoman's work, stayed up several nights in a row, and got that taken care of. Our new organizational structure introduced some new folds in our communication strategies. Scott Jarrett, Megan Gilbertson, and my deputy, Catherine Coleman, all worked very closely together to make sure that we got good information out to voters and the general public. Our team is working well, so I'm excited about that. Internally, on the communication side particularly, I'd like to thank Ray, who's going to chat probably in a second here, and Keely Varvel. They were instrumental in making sure that the operational setup and flow was in top form. And something I think that's going to get mentioned is we had to consolidate from 229 polling places into 148, essentially within a couple of quick days. And managing to collect all of what had been distributed to a lot of those polling places that were closed, catalog and then redistribute ballots so that they would be available in the right places for the right voters meant we had to create a new model for turnout. Scott and Ray and other folks did that. So kudos to all of you. This is where leadership has to recognize that real experience did come through when called on. And last, I want to make sure that some of the folks that are deep behind the scenes, our programmers, don't get left out of this mix. Mike Johnson, Gary Bellata, and a lot of our programmers at the Recorder's Office literally worked overnight to turn our site book check-in system from a polling place election day type of model into a vote anywhere, vote center model effectively overnight. These guys were, when I checked in with them the next day, they were bleary-eyed, but they had gotten the job done in very short time. So we made that shift, and I'm proud of our team. I'm very glad our partnership with the board is helping to make elections, and this election, the success that it was. I'm happy to say that it is my reasoned judgment that the legacy of 2016 is gone. The new Maricopa County Recorder's Office and election department team with the board is ready to take on any challenge. I'm very proud to be partnered with you, Mr. Chairman, and the rest of the members in this effort. And I very much look forward to facing, confronting, and defeating any challenges we might face in August and November. And with that, I thank you for the opportunity to give you a couple of words. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. I appreciate it. Scott, you want to do the presentation, and then you can invite Ray Valenzuela to say anything, or would you like Ray to say before your presentation?
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll go ahead and progress with the presentation. Then Mr. Valenzuela does have some early voting statistics and things that he'll provide towards the end of the report.
Fabulous. Thank you.
So, first I want to just highlight, there's a little bit of delay on progressing the presentation, but highlight the many different ways or wide array of voting options that we provided the voters to vote in this March 17th presidential preference election. We allowed voters to vote at home or by mail. They could, if they were on the permanent early voting list before the voter registration deadline, they could vote at home. If they requested an early ballot 11 days, so on March 6th, they could also vote at home. But voters could also return those ballots to us at any one of our early voting locations or one of the 148 election day vote centers. We also had early voting locations open, 34 of those opened before the election, with 9 of those open 27 days before the election, providing voters that option to vote early. We also have a special election board, so if those were voters that could not complete their ballot by themselves, we had bipartisan boards that were available that could go out and allow voters to vote in their residences. We sent voters, our uniform overseas and citizen voters, ballots by mail that they could return to us. Those went out starting 45 days in advance of the election, and those voters could request a ballot all the way up until right before the 7 p.m. deadline on election day. If voters were experiencing an emergency the weekend before the election, we had 7 emergency voting locations available for those voters as well. And then we had 148 election day vote anywhere vote centers. And this is really an achievement that I just wanted to highlight because of the challenges that we are facing with COVID-19. We were having cancellation calls from poll workers and our polling locations right leading up to the election day, several days in advance of the election. We're also having challenges in being able to obtain those cleaning supplies that we needed to ensure that all 229 locations were supplied and that those poll workers would be able to wipe down those high-touch surfaces, those check-in stations, those voting booths, those pens. We're having a difficult time being able to obtain those supplies. Those deliveries were not coming in. And on that March 12th evening, when the Board of Supervisors provided that guidance in that direction to redesign this model from 229 polling locations down to 151 and then ultimately the 148 voting locations that we provided on election day. We started that Thursday evening really working through the night. And as the recorder, Mr. Fontes, stated, this was really an all-hands-on-deck response effort. We had members from the leadership team from Election Day, members from Election Services, as well as the recorder's team, especially their IT team and the GIS team, helping us reprogram those check-in stations, helping us go out. We had Mr. Bonkowski, our AD, for logistics and warehouse management, leading the effort to go out and retrieve those cleaning supplies from polling locations that had already been delivered their kits. We needed to retrieve ballots so we could really turn this into an election day vote center model. We took what usually takes us months to plan for election. We compressed that down into 5 days, working tirelessly through the night on that Thursday night, but it did not stop on that Friday morning. We worked the entire weekend, the team, to really be able to pull off this election and serve Maricopa County voters. Some of the decision making that went into determining where those voting locations would be housed or provided were based on, and one of the primary drivers is what is in front of you now is a heat map. We really identified where those in-person voters, based on historical trends, those Democratic voters tend to vote in person. And you can see from this heat map, anywhere that is highlighted with a darker color or darker hue, that represents those higher in-person voting patterns and trends. And the yellow dots represent where those voting locations ultimately ended up being. And the high amount of locations those yellow dots are located in those higher, darker blue colors. So that's where we ended up identifying where those locations should be. We also considered factors to make sure that our minority voters were served, and those Native American precincts that serve those Native American voters, we kept a voting location in every single one of those precincts. We also, other factors we considered in determining which locations we may have to close. So if there were 2 locations that were close together that were serving a high density in-person voting area, we looked to see whether those locations had a high probability or high propensity to close because they were serving senior or elderly populations. So that was one of the factors we considered as well. But this election could not have been a success without the support from the county as a whole. We really had one Maricopa County model and solution. We had trained county employees to assist with setting up our polling locations, setting up our site books, our check-in system, setting up our accessible voting device, and setting up our precinct-based tabulators, the new equipment that we were deploying in all of our polling locations. But our county employees were incredibly flexible. They had planned to start their day on their routes, helping set up this equipment. We had to call them last minute and ask them to come down to downtown McTech to pick up those cleaning supplies that we had went out and we had gathered from all those polling locations that we had already dispersed equipment, and they came downtown. They also picked up ballots that we needed to create this vote center model, and those county employees were really the backbone that made this vote center model work, and also ensuring that we were able to distribute those cleaning supplies so poll workers could use them to clean and make sure that all those high touch surfaces were disinfected and making a safe voting environment for our poll workers and voters that voted in person. We also had IT members from our Office of Enterprise Technology, as well as IT professionals from the Recorder's Office, dispersed throughout the county regionally to, if there were issues on election day or through setup, that they could respond appropriately. And then we also had a significant showing of county employees from across all departments that staffed and manned all those closed polling locations. So over 80 polling locations when we ended up reducing down from 229 to 148. In addition to posting signage, we also had a county member staff those locations and then be able to redirect voters to their closest polling location. So this was really a huge effort from the county, and the county manager's office helped coordinate those staff members that were manning those polling locations. And all of this, and facing these challenges, we ended up having historic turnout for the March 17th Democratic presidential preference, not only in terms of mail-in ballots, but also as far as in-person voting. When you compare election day to 2016, we had 35,000 voters, Democratic voters, vote in person in 2016. In 2020, we had over 36,000, so an increase of over 1,200 that we were able to serve. And the longest lines that we experienced were really in the evening time, and they were all under 10 minutes. So that is a significant success as you compare with some of the other states that were holding an election on March 17th, that some of them were experiencing significantly long lines or were not even able to hold their elections on the same day that we were able to provide Maricopa County voters with over 148 polling locations, vote center model, as well as being able for them to drop off their early ballots. We also had our provisional ballots were down as far as compared to 2016. 2016, we had over 24,630 provisional ballots. In 2020, we had 8,747 provisional ballots cast. As far as a percentage, in 2016, that represented about 22% of the total in-person voters had to cast a provisional ballot. In 2020, we had 19% of our voters cast a provisional ballot, and the vast majority of those were independents. So, are those voters that were not eligible to vote in this election, but it was down over 3 percentage points from 2016. And then Ray, I don't know, do you want to go ahead and discuss some of the early voting processing stats?
Yes, I'll go ahead and add, again, as I call it, meat to the bones on some of these. But before I do want to also thank the board for their support, but go one step further and publicly praise the thousands of citizens who stepped up in this crisis to serve as polling place board workers. So we still had some of the numbers that maybe Scott may have mentioned or will, turnout of over 85% of our board workers still showed up, and we are very thankful. And also iterate the county team concept that, as Scott mentioned, several of the departments, the county departments, divisions, leaned in to assist. And even at the highest levels, such as Joy Rich and managing the Josue Macias, Valerie Beckett, Fields, Mosley, Ed with his OET, FMD, Reed, setting up our incident response. So I want to make sure we're publicly praising the fact that we are a county team, and it proves that the county, Maricopa County, truly is best in class. So I wanted to make sure we recognize that. As far as meat on the bones here, some of the stuff that Scott has on the slide here, I wanted to add some value to it. As an example, in 2016, the early voting, or in this case, early voting, 321,870 participants, 43.95%, but that equates to 90% of the election. In 2016, we only had 215,242 Democrat participants, which was only 86% approximately. So we've increased our viability or participation through the mail ballot processing. Even in this election, it continues to grow. So it's 86% 2016 up to 90% of the election or the ballots cast were by mail. Other things is to add as far as provisionals, as Scott already had talked about that, but I did want to reiterate that 8,747, some of those are, or the majority of those are not counted. You can see that the 7,000, the reason being is that those are the majority are independents or not registered. So it does sway to saying we're not counting a lot of provisionals, but I want to point to the fact that the reason being is we're real-time resolving provisionals, meaning there were 2,023 voters, early voters, that came in that were sent the packet but did not return it. In previous setups, they would have had to vote provisionally because we didn't know if they returned it. So salvaged and not disenfranchised were 2,023 early voters that genuinely did not return. Of that, in addition to that, we could have had thousands upon thousands individuals with name and address change. Those two are real-time cured. So the provisional should and could have been upwards in the 10, 20,000 in old-time processing rules. So the fact that we cured those real-time, I wanted to point that out. Last but not least is wanted to point out our UOCABA, which we talked about earlier, in SEBs. The SEBs are the special election boards that go out to serve those in nursing homes and assisted care. We worked out special procedures, which is, again, shows how best in class we are to be able to develop something that in this time that is different. We actually were able to do, if you want to call it, window voting. I mean, we've actually had an individual that we would basically slid that under. They went through the window, we assisted, or in nursing home, we actually set up an emergency, what we would call ballot on demand site. We created that overnight as well so that we could set up in the lobby. We wouldn't have to disturb or go in through the whole facility. But I just want to point out the innovation that went through literally within a matter of 24 to 40 hours to adjust to this COVID-19. So that I praise to them. We had over 124 interactions with individuals in that special needs group, 7 Braille ballots, 39 SEBs, and so on. And last but not least, the UOCABA, we had over 2,068 military and overseas voters as part of this 329,000 mail ballot process that went out. We are very innovative, and I want to applaud ourselves and the county, Maricopa County as a whole, that 1,888 went by email. 180 were mailed. So we are on the cusp of being a leader in the class as far as digital distribution of that. And so, again, I applaud the elections team as a whole for getting that and making that move forward. With that, I think, again, we have quite a few, milestones, but I'll leave it there. Other than the one last thing that people are asking about is, and always do, part of the canvas, you'll see an EV rejects report, which says how many were bad SIGs, how many were no SIGs. And that occurs, and we try to do better education. But what I will tell you is that in 2016, we had over 6,563 rejects, if you will. 710 bad signatures, 4,000 returned late, 1,500 not signed. This election, we went from 6,000 to 3,000 of the 321. Again, 1% of the total, 584 that were unmatchable signatures, 1,893 that are late. Although that's a high number, in comparison to 2016, that's 4,000 that were returned late, down to 18. And we continue to try to make that a better process. But just wanted to point out, give you some meat for some of those things that you're seeing on a canvas report. And with that, I'll turn it back to Scott and go from there.
Scott?
And then, Mr. Chairman, members of the...
Scott,
yes,
a quick
Mr.
thing. I just want to point out that we are going to lose a supervisor in about 8 minutes. So go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I just had a couple more items to discuss, and then I'll turn it over back to the board for questions. But we did have new equipment, new tabulation equipment in this election, and it provided us the ability to be able to count our votes much quicker than in years past. And we were done pretty much counting by last Friday, before the end of the election. And we were really just waiting for that 5-day cure period for provisional ballots and signatures, which ended at 5 p.m. on Tuesday. We did also introduce our new electronic adjudication procedures, and we had over 4,560 ballots that went through electronic adjudication. We were able to process those in under a minute. And there was about 1,602 ballots that needed to have an action taken. The remaining 2,954 ballots, those were true overvotes, true blank votes, or ballots that we could not determine what the voter's intent was. So our electronic adjudication moved much faster than what we had before as far as manual duplication. And then as part of that new equipment, we had a brand new accessible voting device. And that is on the slide there. And we had 1,344 ballots, hard copy durable ballots, printed with that accessible voting device and voted in the precinct. And as that compares to our old Edge machine, over the entire lifespan of that machine, which was over 24 years, there's only 8,000 uses of it. So in one Democratic presidential preference election, we've had over 1,344. And with that, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I turn it back to you, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, because he's sitting 6 feet away from me right now, I will turn it over. Supervisor Gallardo has a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll make this real quick, and don't have a particular question, but just a couple of comments. Last night I sat at home and I started my adult career there in the elections department. I was there for 14 years, and I know the challenges that many of our election staff face at every election. But I try to go back at all the county-wide elections that I participated in, and it's not just the primary and general. I think we had the Beltran election, we had a charter election, we had the gubernatorial runoff election, the first and only gubernatorial runoff election we ever had in the state. We had the first PP&E. But anyways, nonetheless, out of all these elections, you always expect problems on election day. Never would you ever imagine that you would have to deal with the pandemic on election day, and that's exactly what we dealt with. With your leadership, Mr. Chairman, and with a great election team and great staff across the county, great employees, everyone coming together and working as a team, we were able to come through and make just an excellent election day, an opportunity for all voters to have the opportunity to exercise their right to vote, even through this pandemic. We stayed on course. We made some quick adjustments to satisfy some of the issues that came in at the 11th hour. But that's all. I mean, by us staying on, that just shows discipline. It really does. We stayed on course. We moved forward. We made the adjustments. We made sure the polling places were safe. I went to many of the polling sites. I saw voters going in and out. They were using the hand sanitizer as they go in, and they were using the hand sanitizer as they were coming out. We just had a great day, and it really showed Maricopa County does shine as we all work as a team and we all work together. But I just saw just a great effort on Election Day, everyone coming together. Couldn't be more pleased. I anticipate that we'll have to address some issues come our primary and general, and we'll deal with that at a later date. But I just want to thank everyone for their effort. You, Mr. Chairman, all our chiefs. I know our chiefs worked really hard with everyone to make sure that everyone was involved. But I just want to thank everyone and really pleased on the outcome of March 17th.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the nice comments. I'll look out into the cyber world. Supervisor Chukri, I think I just heard you say something.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I apologize.
Okay, so Supervisor Gates,
yeah,
I'm sorry.
That was me. I'm sorry. I've got to jump off here and participate in a community event encouraging people to donate blood, where we will be social distancing, so my apologies. I just want to reiterate everything that's been said. Thank you for your leadership. Thanks, Scott, Ray, and the entire team and everyone in the county who came together. Thanks so much, but I do apologize that I do have to jump off in 2 minutes.
Okay, I will. Let's. Anybody else needing to say something so we can keep Supervisor Gates on for the vote?
Mr. Chairman, I'll reserve my comments after the vote if I could, please, so Mr. Gates can be a part of it.
Great. Okay. Is that true for you, Supervisor Sellers? Okay. Hearing none. Okay. I am ready for a motion then.
Mr. Chairman, I am honored to be able to make the motion that we approve the canvass of the returns for the March 17th, 2020 presidential preference election.
Thank you, Supervisor Gallardo. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I'll give that to Supervisor Sellers. So we've heard him today. So I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Bill, have a nice event. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, everybody.
You bet. Supervisor Chukri.
Mr. Chairman, I do want to note it for the record that I was very, very gracious in letting Mr. Sellers have that second, even though I was a clear win.
Fran is nodding.
That being said, okay, all kidding aside, I want to thank everyone that not only is on today's call, but also who participated in what turned out to be a very excellent election day for the presidential preference. And we tried to do the best we could with very difficult circumstances, and I think we all came together. And I love hearing best in class, as we all know. I say it too much, but I really think it symbolizes who we are as a county. And Scott, thanks to you. And I can only imagine the stress you were under. I'm kind of seeing a little bit of that stress in the restaurant world these days with this virus. But really, hats off to you as well for just really bringing in kind of a different perspective about ensuring that we didn't leave any stone unturned or utilize a discipline that we made sure that that Tuesday would be a success. So I only have one question, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to belabor the meeting because I know we have probably a very busy day for all of us. But Scott, was there any surprises with the equipment, right? So it's new equipment. There's always kind of quirks. And I know you had done some dry runs and you had try to anticipate any kind of potential difficulty. But were there any surprises with the equipment? I know that setting some of it up, a couple machines weren't cooperating, but it was more us trying to figure it out, or it could have been user error. I just wanted to ensure that we didn't see any problems that we would need to address before the August primary.
So, Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Chukri, we did have some lessons learned with our new equipment. As we always, anytime you have new equipment, you identify some ways that you can improve. Some of that will be addressed through our training and just reminding our poll workers of how to set that equipment up onto our ballot boxes so that it ensures that we don't have misreads. So that is really the only lesson learned or the surprise that we encountered with this election and our new equipment.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You are welcome. And just for the record, I've also asked Clerk Fran McCarroll if there were any public comments, and she had said there were not. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that we were looking for those as well. Supervisor Sellers, any comments or questions?
I just want to reinforce how impressive it was that we came together as a team. Some great challenges there as we approached this election day. And I just can't say enough for how the elections team, the elections department came together with the recorder's office and everybody in the county, including the sheriff's office. Everybody really worked to make this come out very, very well with all the challenges that we face. So I just want to thank everyone for that.
Great. Thank you for that. So maybe as a final comment, yeah, these are changing times, and it seem like this PPE was months ago, and the troubling issues that we were dealing with then have almost magnified at this point. I'd have to say I'm extremely proud of the county and the state. We were able to pull off a day of election where a couple of other states postponed it. I'm wondering if they're rethinking that now as this has transpired. But I guess that also gave the chance for a lot of states to see how we dealt with this, and it's just ringing with success. So I want to thank the election team, Scott, Ray, Adrian, for working together to pull off a fantastic day of election. I don't want to belabor the point, but I almost feel like we were rescued a little bit by other county departments. I got to see McDOT. I got to see an environmental services person working. I got to see all of us devoted at least half, if not all of our staff to day of help wherever Scott felt he needed. And I think that came into place. So thank you to all the chiefs and all of our admins for shouldering the burden on that. And I also want to remember there's a gigantic thing about planning, and during my chairman's address, I said that we will be looking at these elections and learning and having summary meetings, what went right, what went wrong. I'm assuming we'll have one of those opportunities again here in the near future so we can talk about those and plan. So we are one down and two more to go to pull off two more great elections in the next year, and to give the community, we can look back at this and know that we were in this pandemic and still pulled off a great election through hard work. And And Scott, especially, you know, if I could give you a virtual pat on the back, I would, due to social distancing right now. I just want to tell you specifically, this was a new event for you. Ray and Adrian had the ability and a little bit of a history on some of elections, but this was your first election, and I want to point out that your effort, I looked at you and felt bad. I thought we were just about to kill you, and it wasn't had anything to do with the coronavirus. It was just be hard work and no sleep. And so I want to absolutely thank you from the board and all of us for pulling off this election. And we look forward to your hard work in the upcoming to August and November. So with that, I am going to close the meeting. Thank you all for joining us, and we are adjourned.